Happy Wednesday evening and welcome into our Bible study. We're so glad to see everybody. We're going to be covering the 21st chapter of 2 Samuel here in just a little bit. We're going to be talking about the testimonies of David. It's kind of a sad thing. We've made a lot of progress, but we're getting into the good man of God's life. As we head into it, though, I do want to mention something about the structure in this setup. It's what's called chiastic, and I want you to think about that word for just a little bit, and if it maybe takes you back to English class of yesteryears, perhaps, maybe any writing episodes, I don't know, maybe. Well, the last four chapters where we've arrived in 2 Samuel is chapters 21 through 24. They form a six-fold appendix to the book. The information here comes from different periods of David's life. So as we go through, I encourage not to think, we're picking up right where we left off. No, it's kind of like the end of Judges, and it goes back and just fits in all over the place. And that's the case with here. And some of these are impossible to date for sure, to know exactly when these transpired during the rule of David. These materials, however, as I mentioned a moment ago, they've been arranged in a chiastic manner. Anyone ever wrote a chiastic poem? Or maybe something along those lines. Well, here's the way it works. Let's say you have four main ideas in a poem. And so what you'll do is have main idea A, and here's one way of stating that, or something that applies to that theme. And then you have main theme B, and here's something that goes along with that. Main theme C, or the third one, and here's something that goes along with that. And then you'll have main theme D, or 4, and something that corresponds with it. Well, then you'll pick right up where you left off with the final one, in D. And along that same line, or that theme, here's a sub-theme of D. And then you'll build yourself all the way back out to A, and that's one of those things I like to say, is you're going full circle in your writing. And you can look at it, that's kind of the way that this transpires also in these last four chapters of 2 Samuel. So we're going to start out with a discipline of the king, and then we'll move into a list. Okay, so you're going to have, instead of 4 though, there's only 3 of these. And so you'll have A1, which is a discipline of David, and then you're going to have B1, which is a list involving the king, and then you'll have C1, which is a song of the king. And then we're going to have C2, which is a song of the king. We will have B2, which is a list of David, and then we'll have A2, referring to another time that David was disciplined. And so that's the chiastic structure that's going on here. I don't know if that interests you at all. That's what it is in the way that it's built. All right, so let's open up in the first verse here of 2 Samuel 21. This is a discipline that David receives. You might be able to argue, I don't know that he really deserves it so much, but it's the kingdom of Israel that's being punished because of something that has taken place with the crown in the past. So, verse 1, there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And finally, David inquired of the Lord. Okay, so it's true that, Matthew 5:45, our Heavenly Father sends sunshine on the unjust and the just, and rain on the good and on the evil. That's true. But when it's like a prolonged period, like years, that's something that's concerning. And after a while, David takes notes, and he's thinking, it seems like something's off here. And we also know that it's possible that God can use weather for punishment, in addition to it's just, normal everyday occurrences. James chapter 5, 17 and 18, Elijah, he's a man with a nature like ours. But he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. He prayed as a punishment from God, and God sent it. Well, then Elijah prays again, and God sends the rain. He takes the punishment away. So David's thinking, this might be a punishment that's being sent from God. Probably number one, because it's been a long time since we've had any rain. But what might be a second indicator that this might be coming from God to David? Okay, that's true. Yeah, good. That's true also. As far as time frame, how many years? You notice that? Once it gets to the 3rd, he's like, maybe I ought to talk to God, the divine number. Let me talk to the divine one and see what's going on. So not a bad idea. Well, as we further read here, the Lord answers him you were wise to ask me about this. It is because of Saul, the previous ruler, and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites. So the king called the Gibeonites, and he spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. I want to pause a couple of times in our story, and I want to go back and get some background information. Turn to Joshua, the 9th chapter, and I would like to fill in some details for us here. Man, it's been a long time since we've discussed the Gibeonites. But you might recall the Israelites, they, of course, crossed over the Jordan, and they're starting to conquer some territories. And people are hearing of this, and they're frightened. Well, in Joshua 9, verse 3, we find that the inhabitants of Gibeon, those are natives of the land, again, they're Amorites who are supposed to be destroyed. When they heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and torn, worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes. You know, they're trying to establish something here, a pattern, aren't they? Oh boy, we've been going so far and we don't have any food left to eat. We don't have good clothes left to wear any longer. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly, and it seems like they fit the part really well. On down to verse 6. They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us." Down in verse 14. So the men took some of their provisions. They said, "Oh, okay, well, these guys aren't any harm to us." They made a mistake. They did not ask counsel from the Lord. And they went ahead and acted on their own anyway. So Joshua made peace with them, a great ruler, but this is a blunder of his. Joshua made peace with them, made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. Well, at the end of 3 days, after they'd made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. And down in verse 18, the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leadership. But the leaders said, "Well, what can we do now? We've sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them." But then you read on and they say, "Well, we're going to enslave these guys, and that's going to be their punishment forever." And a pretty good one, probably. But nonetheless, these are people that should have been destroyed. They couldn't be destroyed because they swore by their own God's name they would never harm them, and so they have to live by that. I don't think God's happy with that, but they made the mistake of not asking God. David, the wise ruler, doesn't want to duplicate that mistake. When he's thinking something's fishy going on here in this famine, after the divine number of 3 years, he inquires of God and asks, "Hey, what's taking place? Is this a punishment on us as a country? If so, what can I do to fix this in our relationship and with your people?" So we continue on back in our text of 2 Samuel 21, and we're told that the children of Israel had sworn protection to them. And that's the background to this. This goes hundreds of years prior, and they have to continue to fulfill the word of their ancestors. The only problem is the first king, who's now gone, is the gift that keeps on giving. Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. You know, these are Canaanites, and they're among the territory of his people, and he says, "We need to get rid of these guys just like all the others." And perhaps he as well did not take counsel of the Lord. Saul often has a lot of zeal for the things that he does, but he doesn't always have book, chapter, and verse for it, does he? He's not always concerned, as he should be, with what the Lord has told him to do. And that's the issue. He's violated the word of Israel, and now God has to step in. Okay, I will say this. I desire to give you more information on that. But whenever you find this in the Bible, tell me where it is. I'm not sure. We just don't know a lot from Scripture about this other than what we're told right here. And again, this goes back to some point in David's reign. I think the evidence we're going to find for some of this stuff, maybe even as far back as very early in his reign. So he does have punishment, that has come, that it continues to come, but I think this actually goes back and supplements information probably of which we've learned some time back. So they were supposed to protect the Gibeonites. Saul and his house, keep that in mind, his regime was responsible for not doing that, and now something has to be done about it. If you're wondering what might the motivation have been for this, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 22. This is one idea that some Bible students put out. I'm not saying this is 100% the way it is. It might not be. But some believe this could have been involving the trespass against the Gibeonites. 1 Samuel chapter 22, and we're going to read from there verse 7. Okay, 1 Samuel 22, verse 7. And of course, this is when Saul was trying to chase down David and to kill him. Well, Saul said to his servants in verse 7, who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin," his own countrymen, of course, "will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? And will he make you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds?" I'm going to show on the map the area about which we're talking. And if you'll notice, the tribe of Benjamin, which is going to be to the east of my laser beam, and Benjamin is in kind of a purple, it's not very large, but you'll see that within Benjamin you have Gilgal, possibly, we don't know its location for sure. You also have Gibeah, and just right around that, a little to the west, maybe to the north, what other town is there? Gibeon, the Gibeonites. Not only did they live in Israel, but they also lived among the people of Benjamin within that tribe. They had sworn allegiance to them. And notice, again, I would say very close to Gibeon on the map of the Gibeonites, you have the town of Gibeah. And why is that important relative to Saul? Okay, yeah, good. And there's a reason he's comfortable under that. That may be his old shade tree from even back when he's a kid. That's his hometown. And so Saul is extremely familiar with the Gibeonites. These are foreigners, and he probably doesn't want them around in the area. And so he kills them, even though his ancestors swear an allegiance to help protect them. And notice he says right here in verse 7 of 1 Samuel 22, "Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse, if he takes over, David, is he going to do for you what I've done for you? And give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all ... Question, where did Saul get all of those fields and vineyards in the area of Benjamin? You see, it would make a lot of sense that he killed these people, and he could have just very well been intending to use it for his own political gain. And it would make a lot of sense if you know well the character of Saul. Okay, so let's go back to our text of 2 Samuel 21. 2 Samuel 21. Saul had sought to kill these people in his zeal for the children of Israel and for Judah. Hopefully that means good things. Verse 3, "Therefore David said to the Gibeonites, 'What shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?'" Now that's a reference consistently in the Old Testament to Israel. And so he's saying, hey, what can I do that you can take this curse off of us and God's people of Israel can be blessed again? And the Gibeonites responded to him, "We will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us." So he said, "Well, just tell me, whatever you say, I will do for you." Then they answered the king, "As for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel." Time out. Who's that? Who's the guy who plotted and set up the attempt to eradicate the Gibeonites? King Saul, right? Okay. Of course, he's gone, right? He's already passed on from the scene. David's now king. But as far as that guy, they say, verse 6, "Let 7 of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul," remember the birthplace of the former king, "whom the Lord chose." And the king said, "You've named it. I will give them over to you." Is this really the way of going about things? Why would this suggestion be made? And 7 descendants, the number of perfection, right? I think it's probably perfect punishment as they see it, is going to be dealt out. Is this being a little bloodthirsty? Or is this the way things ought to occur? Turn back to what the law of God says about this. Numbers chapter 35. You know, you could argue that, couldn't you? But, you know, the Israelites agreed, right? They said it. But yeah, right. I know it's exactly what you're saying, Paul. So, Numbers chapter 35. All right, let's read God's testimony about whenever people are unjustly put to death. That's happened with these Gibeonites. You know, yeah, they were a little deceitful in the forefront, but Israel has broken her word and the agreement that she made with God. Verse 31 of Numbers 35, moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be put to death. And you shall accept no ransom for him who has fled to his city of refuge, ... Verse 33, you shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land. So it's not just the individual, but it's also on the whole country. If you don't take care of these wicked perpetrators, you'll defile your whole country in which you live, and no atonement can be made for the land, for the blood that is shed in it, except by the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. I don't think this is a claim at all that's out of line. In fact, I think it proves that it's the will of the Lord, and it's going to be beneficial to Israel to satisfy the blood of the innocent people, and the Gibeonites. Now, these are their descendants, right, in fairness to those guys. So, but this is the opportunity to make it good, at least as the Lord sees things, and he would lift the curse from Israel. But what about the descendant? Why descendants? And, you know, the guy who did it's gone. Again, I would suggest this. Some argue that these who are going to be selected may have very well had a part in carrying out within the regime of Saul this wickedness that had taken place. And that could certainly make a lot of sense. But one thing's for sure, the agreement's put in place that the land needs to be appeased of this innocent blood, and that would seem to insinuate this blood that's going to be shed is guilty, and then God will lift the curse off of Israel. The king says, I'll give you the 7 descendants of Saul. Verse 7. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath that was between them. All right, I want us to pause right here. Also go back to 1 Samuel, this time chapter 20. 1 Samuel 20, and we're going to look back in verse 12, and then we'll read verses 14 through 17. Jonathan's the one, by the way, verse 12, speaking to David. We can just go down to verse 14. And Jonathan, the best friend of David, and of course the son of Saul, verse 14, he said, if I'm still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, I ask of you in return for this benefit I'm paying you, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. I think it's kind of interesting that you have one oath that's been violated, and the slaughter of these innocents, the descendants of those, maybe that's part of the descendants of those who are deceptive. All right? And so you have one oath that's been violated there, and David, in fulfilling the oath, or in fulfilling the demands of the law, he has to be careful not to violate an oath that he's made himself to the Lord. And there's one descendant of Saul that he can't give over because he's sworn to protect him. And that's why he doesn't hand over Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. Verse 8 of 2 Samuel 21. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, and that sounds confusing, like he's going to hand over Mephibosheth now to be executed. And he does. Obviously, that's not the Mephibosheth that is Saul's sons. There are a lot of names that are used multiple times, and this undoubtedly is another descendant who is probably named after him. The king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, in verse 7, but he takes Armoni and another descendant of Saul that was named Mephibosheth. We're told these were the two sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul. And you look back at the sons of Saul and their exact names, and this doesn't match up with the first generation, but it seems that these are probably grandsons, in case you're wondering. These are descendants, and technically they're still sons of Saul. And the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. I hate to do this. This is another one. It doesn't make any sense unless I show you something about this. If you will, just bear with me. Turn back to 1 Samuel chapter 18. I think this is an opportunity. I don't know what David means by this. He may only have select descendants of Saul. There may only be so many left that he can even choose. Or this might be his opportunity to take justice into his own hands and in a completely legal way, but also to kind of get back at a little bit the people who had been so rough to him throughout his life in Saul's household. So back in 1 Samuel chapter 18, look with me in verse 17. Then Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, and probably better, Adriel, the Meholathite, for a wife. Does that sound familiar? The one who was given to another man, her descendants are going to be among those who are handed over to be executed then. Okay? Continuing down, verses 20 and 21. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." So there's this new daughter that David's supposed to marry. He does marry. Does anybody recall what happens to Michal? What happens with her? Okay, so Daddy takes her away, and I don't think this is probably according to her will. She loves David, okay, and gives her to marry another man. Well, fast forwarding many years forward, we find that David makes the request when he takes over power again, and he gets back his wife who was given away. But go back to 2 Samuel, and this time chapter 6, and let's recall an episode involving this lovely lady of his. 2 Samuel 6 and verse 16. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Going down into verses 20 through 23. And David returned to bless his household. Come home and he's the hero, and he has the ark of God back, and things are going so well in the kingdom. And he comes home to meet an unhappy wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, who came out and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." Now, we had talk about that back then, and I don't believe at all this means that David was showing off his private parts to ladies, just to be very frank about it, as some accuse him of doing. I believe what this is she thinks she's better than everybody else. And anyone that's associated with a kingly household ought to act like they're better than everyone else, and they shouldn't wear just common dress and, like we would say, shorts and a t-shirt like all of the poor folks out there. And I think this infuriates David, and as he goes on to express, because he doesn't look at himself as being greater than any of the peasants of the kingdom as she does, but she has greatly insulted her husband, the king, to his face. And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father as prince of Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will make merry before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, meaning I'm going to continue to go in and out among the people. There'll be times I act just like all the other people, because I think that's how he still saw himself in his heart at this point. He says, and I will be abased in your eyes, but by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor, because I'm going to be just like one of them are. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Now, we don't know a whole lot more about her, but as we go back into our text, we do find out more about Michal and what she did. David doesn't have relations with her anymore. David doesn't have any children through her. And we find where we left off in verse 8 of 2 Samuel 21. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the two sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, listen to this, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul. Well, where'd she get all these kids? Well, let's read on. Whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai the Meholathite. Who is Adriel again in relation to Michal? Very good. Yeah. That's her brother-in-law. So there's a sibling-in-law connection, and it would seem to suggest that Adriel died. It could have been in the transition of power, and probably at a pretty young age, it sounds like. So she takes her own nephews in and raises them up. And so I find it interesting to say all that, to say this. When David's looking for the 7 people of Saul's household to be executed, he said, well, you're not doing it to my best friend's son, Mephibosheth. I've sworn to take care of him. But my wife has been looking out for 5 of her nephews, and you can have them. I find that interesting. Now, again, there may not be many more from which to choose, but this could be a way for justice to be served somewhat cold. And once again, I would say like the chiastic structure of this section for things to come full circle. Verse number 9 of our text, 2 Samuel 21. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before the Lord. So they fell, all 7 of them together, and they were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley harvest. Now, why might it make sense to take care of this matter before the harvest? What's going on in the land? Of course, there's a famine, we know. Probably, why would that famine be in place? Maybe from a lack of rain and or pests coming in and destroying the crop. We don't want that to happen for the 3rd year, or maybe by this point even looking at the 4th year in a row, right? And so they take care of this matter before, at the very beginning of the harvest. Verse 10, now Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock. And from the beginning of harvest until the late rains poured on them from heaven, and she did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beast of the field by night. And David was told what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. And I think you see the love of David and mercy in his heart. He's touched by this and how devoted she is in the protection of these bodies. Then David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the street of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them up after the Philistines had struck down Saul in Gilboa. Okay, so we have a lot of locations here. Let me point out, we can identify these from the map. So if you'll go right here over to the east, still on the west side of the Jordan River though, you'll see Mount Gilboa. Maybe you can see it. I know that the print's not very large on these. So even if you can't, you go over about midway but a little closer to the Jordan River and you have Mount Gilboa. That's where Saul and his sons die in battle with the Philistines. And it's in Bethshan that they're impaled in such an embarrassing way by the Philistines. But the men of Jabesh Gilead over here on the east side of the Jordan are so brave, and under the cover of night they go over and they steal the bodies of Saul and his son, and then they're able to burn and to bury those in a more respectful way. So whenever David, down the road here, finds out what it is that's taken place by this widow of Saul, and she's so torn up about it, and she's so dedicated to help protect the decaying corpses of her loved ones, then he sins, and he has Jonathan, and also he has Saul's bones taken up from where they were laid to rest, and they bring them back down, verse 13, the bones of Saul, the bones of Jonathan. They gathered them who had been hanged. They buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son in the country of Benjamin for the first time, in Zelah, in the tomb of Kish his father. Okay, I wish I could tell you exactly where Zelah is, but I do not know. However, understanding that this is the tomb of Kish, Saul's father, and Benjamin, Zelah has to be right next to what place? Wouldn't Gibeah make a lot of sense? Yeah, so it's going to be, and I'm not going to try to tell you it's a suburb, okay? These are tiny places as they are. But, I mean, it's one of those that doesn't even have a post office. It's so small. So it's just going to be right around Gibeah where the burying takes place of all this family together. Now remember, David does not have to do this. This is not only the king, but as well the family that sought to take his life, that was a thorn in his side, and yet he pays this extra respect he really doesn't have to do because he's so touched by this lady and the devotion that she shows toward her family's corpses. The end of verse 14. So they performed all that the king commanded, and after that, God heeded the prayer for the land. The land is healed. I'm sure the windows of heaven open up and they get good amounts of rain. If they're pests, they're driven away. They don't come back, and the people are able to bring in a good harvest once more. Okay, any comments down through verse 21 and what we covered about the famine, the first punishment here that's listed in this section? So let's spend the rest of our time looking at the last 8 verses of 2 Samuel 21. We're going to talk about the heroes of David. So verse 15, when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, it's constantly these two together, David and his servants went with him. They went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Verse 16, then Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant. What do you think his ancestry is, this guy? You trace his roots back, and you run one of those really accurate DNA spit tests today, and where do you think you're going to find him connected? Ah, the giant. Well, there are all kinds of giants who lived over in that area and among the Philistines. Oh, there's one that stands out, though, and especially in David's life. I think you guys are exactly right. It would seem most definitely to be Goliath. That makes a lot of sense. So, Ishbi-Benob is one of the sons of the giant, of Goliath, undoubtedly, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels. I think the NIV may have the better idea here that it's probably the spear head that weighs that, not the entire spear itself. When that's transferred over, that amount of weight, you're looking at 7.5 pounds. All right? A spear that weighs 7.5 pounds isn't that impressive, and the text obviously is trying to make an impression on our mind. However, if you have 7.5 pounds that's found at the end of that spear alone, that's a different matter. You got the weight of a bowling ball, essentially, not a super heavy one, but of a bowling ball at the end of that spear, and you're throwing that thing around like it's a toothpick. So this guy is really big, and he's really strong, just like Dad. He was bearing a new sword, and he thought, you know what? I'm just going to single out this guy, and I'm going to try to kill David. Now, why do you think this youngster, quote unquote, this tyke in size, wants to go after David? Why would he maybe pick him out? Okay, well, obviously, David's the king of Israel, number one, but I think it's far beyond that. He wants to get the guy who got his dad. Okay, keep your spot here. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and this is where David takes out big boy, Papa himself. 1 Samuel 17. I want to remind you of a very important fact. Rick really likes this one. He's been talking about it quite a bit lately. Verses 50 and 51, 1 Samuel 17. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, meaning that's how he got the advantage over him. That is not how he did him in. He struck the Philistine and he killed him. Notice there was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. And as he stood over him, took his sword, drew it out of his sheath, and he killed him and cut off his head with it. He killed him via a sword, and his own sword at that, as he stood over the defenseless giant. He's probably knocked him out. I would say he's out cold. If not, he's so stunned, his eyes are spinning. And so he takes advantage of him and he cuts off his head with a sword. Okay, go back to our text. 21:16, 2 Samuel. So, one of the sons of the giant, Ishbi-Benob by name, he was bearing a new sword, and he thought he could kill David. And notice in what position David seems to be here. He grew faint. He's very weak. Some believe this to be that he actually fainted, and he's passed out from fatigue on the battlefield. And that would be awfully fortuitous, wouldn't it? If this son of the giant, who was killed as David, who's soon to be king, stands over his helpless body, maybe even unconscious, with a sword in his hand. And he may very well find himself right now, the guy who killed his father, passed out on the ground in front of him and a sword in his hand. And he gets to pay David the same treat that David has given to his father. Someone intervenes, though. Verse 17. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. Oh, these guys are always involved in the conflict. But this is war, so that makes sense. He came to his aid, swooped in, and he struck the Philistine, and he killed him himself. But the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." We had discussion on this. No, we don't know 100% for sure. But I believe this is probably immediately preceding the episode that we studied in chapter 11 involving Uriah and Bathsheba. It would make a lot of sense. 18. Now it happened afterward that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, who so happens to be one of the sons of the giant. So how many sons have we encountered of this giant so far? Okay, their names are Ishbi-Benob, and the second one is Saph. All right, now we're in verse 19. Again, there was war at Gob, and this name keeps coming up, Gob, and if you're wondering, where in the world is Gob? Well, if you look in the alternate text of 1 Chronicles chapter 20 in the 4th verse, we're given the name of Gath in that spot. So it seems to either be interchangeable with it, or that may be a suburb. And yes, it's fair to say that because Gath was a sizable city among the Philistines. So, verse 19, again there is war at Gob, or in the area of Gath, with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jair-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed, my New King James text reads this way: the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Do you have something different in your translation? What do you have, Joe? Okay. Oh boy, what are we going to make of this? They're not the same people, I guarantee you. Which one is it? Is it the brother of Goliath, or is it Goliath that he kills? Okay. Now that's another, good. Now that's another tricky one, and I looked that up because I was thinking along the same lines, right? And you look it up, and the meaning of Gittite is Gath. And that is where Goliath is from. And from what we're going to read later, I do think it's go ahead. Yeah, you're fine. So, but I was the same way. It's like, it's a different place. You look it up, no, it's just another name for that place. The Rephidim, is that what that's not an A in short. Please do, yeah. Right, gotcha. Yeah, please do, and let us know, because it probably is, yeah. So, what's going on here? Is this the brother of Goliath? Is this Goliath? I'll be very clear in saying this. New King James is in italics. Are there any others other than NKJV? And what do you have? NKJV? That is that translation, yeah. There may be some others. That's it. Right. And I'm glad to bring that up. I don't think there's any issue at all here. And I agree, that could always be a possibility. I don't think that's it at all. And here, let's continue on, and I'll tell you why that's the case. But I believe this is Goliath, the Gittite, or Goliath of Gath, that this man killed, and there's actually no contradiction in Scripture in the Old Testament about it. Now wait for just a minute, okay? And I'll let you hear the case for that. Okay, so verse 20. Yet there was war. By the way, how many is that's killed now so far? 1, 2, 3. Okay. 4, verse 20. Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Every lady's dream. 24 in number. And he was also born to the giant. Okay. Verse 21. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimea, David's brother, killed him. Where do you think this big boy had learned to speak evil against God and his people? And talk about how he's going to tear them up. But do you think, Dad, you remember what he did with Israel for 40 days and 40 nights before David said, who's this uncircumcised Philistine? I think he is. He goes out and, of course, he becomes legend from that point forward. Now, who would like to say our memory verse in number 22? Okay, very good. And I think this also gives us the identity of who this other one is. You go back and count, these 4 were born to the giants and fell by the hand of David, by the hand of his servants. What for? We've only read of 4 people in this section. Ishbi-Benob, right? He's one of them. And the second one is, I want to say the guy's name who killed him. What's his? Saph, right? Okay, or Soph probably. All right, you have Soph. And then you have someone named Goliath, right? And then you have, who else? Thanks, Paul. I was going to say, we don't know, but he's a little more insulting. We have 6 fingers. So we have every lady's dream with the 12 toes, so she wants in a man. So, yeah, but seriously, though, that's a total of 4. And these are all said to be sons of the giant. Which giant? So who's the Goliath of whom we read that Jonathan kills? That is Goliath Jr. To me, it makes perfect sense. And you see that all the time. That someone, especially in Bible times, but even now we do that. Someone's by the same name. Of course, we have Jeff Bigley or Jeffrey Bigley, and we have Jeff or Jeffrey Jr. Bigley, all the time. And that's the case. This is Goliath Jr. The text bears it out, and I don't think there's any room left to squabble over it. There are these 4. What for? The ones of whom we're just told. And if Goliath's not Goliath Jr., then we don't know the identity of the 4th, but we're told we were just introduced to 4. So that's the only thing that has to make any sense. All right, so that takes us through the end of chapter 21. You might be asking, in this section that's so much about David and the end of his life, why is there so much attention that's given to all these other people? I think it's for good reason. Who gets all the attention during this great 40-year reign but the man of God, David? How many people do you think there were behind the scenes that made this administration work and that enabled these 40 years to be such successful decades for the Lord's people? And man, you talk about a powerful lesson in this for us. Among the Lord's people today, there is often one or one family or a few people who get most of the attention in the congregation. The spotlight's always shining on just a few. But I believe it is God's testimony of how much He appreciates the contributions of all of those that makes the success of His people work. And even though those behind the scenes and those who don't have the spotlight shining on them, often they don't want it shining on them. Even though they might not get that here, one day God will shine the light on them so that all His people will know the contributions that He's made to His kingdom. Okay, any final comments through the end of chapter 21? Yes, sir. Absolutely, well said. And we often soften through the years, don't we? We think, well, it was 20 years ago I made that promise. God never looks at things that way. And that's why He tells us, you better be careful with what you say you're going to do, because I'm going to hold you to that. Good point, Paul. Any others? Okay, now this is funky chicken right here, but I'm going to tell you to, if you will, skip over chapter 22. Okay? We're going to go to chapter 23. I would like for you to read verses 8 through 39, the end of the chapter, to become familiar with those. And let's memorize a very short one that's just like mid-sentence. But I have a reason for that. Verse 39, the last one. Verse 39 of 2 Samuel.